They took the bat. Not after a warning. Not after a complaint filed through the proper channels in the measured bureaucratic language that governs most disputes in professional baseball. Not after a conversation between managers and crew chiefs that ends with handshakes and mutual understanding and everyone returning to their positions. They took the bat immediately. Right there. On the field. In front of 40,000 people who had just watched Shohei Ohtani hit his 22nd home run of the season and were still processing the sound of it, that particular crack that exists nowhere else in baseball, that sound that makes the entire stadium inhale together before the exhale of the crowd rising. When the umpires moved toward the Dodgers dugout with a purpose that had nothing to do with the celebration still happening around them. The bat was gone before Ohtani had finished rounding the bases. And by the time he crossed home plate, MLB had already been notified. There are moments inside a baseball season that feel like they belong to a different sport entirely. This was one of them. The home run should have been the complete story. In any normal context, on any normal night, 22 home runs before the calendar turns to the second half of the season is a story that writes itself. The ball. The distance. The exit velocity that makes scouts type numbers into their phones with the slightly dazed expression of people who are recording something they still don't fully believe. The crowd. The moment. All of it already existed. All of it was already real and complete and worthy of the coverage it would inevitably receive. And then the umpires walked toward the dugout. And nothing about the night was normal anymore. The formal term is impoundment. It sounds more dramatic than the physical. The protocols exist because the situations, while rare, are not unprecedented. Pine tar. Corked barrels. Foreign substances applied to surfaces in ways that alter the physics of contact. The history of baseball contains enough examples of equipment manipulation to justify a system for investigating it when suspicion arises. But suspicion arising around Shohei Ohtani. That is not a normal sentence. That is a sentence that carries weight in both directions simultaneously, the weight of an institution that must apply its rules without exception regardless of who is standing at the plate, and the weight of a name so associated with legitimate, overwhelming, almost incomprehensible natural ability that attaching an investigation to it feels like a category error. And yet the bat was gone. And MLB was involved. And the word urgent was being used by people inside the game who understood what it meant for this investigation to be moving at the speed it was moving. The umpires did not explain themselves on the field. That is not how these moments work. The crew chief, approached by Dodgers personnel who had registered the movement toward the dugout and understood immediately what it meant, said what crew chiefs say in these situations, that the equipment had been flagged for inspection under league protocols and that the matter would be handled through the appropriate channels. Professional. Procedural. Revealing nothing. But the cameras caught everything. The moment the umpire's hand closed around the handle of the bat. The expression on the face of the Dodgers personnel who watched it happen. The way the dugout went still in a particular way that dugouts go still when something unexpected has occurred and everyone inside is rapidly calculating what it means, slowed down. Replayed. Examined from multiple angles with a particular intensity that gets applied to images when the people watching them sense that they are looking at something that matters. MLB's decision to launch an urgent investigation rather than a standard review was itself a statement. The league has procedures for equipment irregularities that operate on timelines measured in days. Testing protocols. Chain of custody documentation. Laboratory analysis that produces results in the measured pace of institutional process. Those procedures exist and they are thorough and they are applied consistently across the sport without regard for the player involved. An urgent investigation is something different. An urgent investigation means that someone inside the league office looked at what had been flagged, looked at the circumstances surrounding it, and made the determination that the normal timeline was not sufficient. That the questions being raised required answers faster than the standard process provides. That whatever had prompted the umpires to move toward the dugout on that particular night after that particular home run was serious enough to accelerate everything. The word urgent does a great deal of work in a sentence like that. The bat itself, by all available accounts, is a model that Ohtani has used for the majority of the season. That detail matters for reasons that cut in multiple directions simultaneously. On one hand, it means that whatever the inspection reveals, or doesn't reveal, applies not just to this home run but potentially to every at-bat in which that model was in his hands. On the other hand, it means that if there is something irregular about the bat, the irregularity has existed in plain sight throughout an entire stretch of games without anyone flagging it until now. Which raises the question that nobody inside the sport wants to ask directly but that the urgent investigation makes unavoidable. Why now? Why this home run, on this night, with this particular bat, triggered a response that 21 previous home runs did not? That question does not have a public answer yet. It may have an explanation that is entirely procedural, a specific complaint from a specific source that followed a specific channel through a specific protocol. It may have an explanation that is more complicated than that. The investigation exists precisely because the answer is not yet known, and because the sport has decided that not knowing is not acceptable. Inside the Dodgers organization, the response was controlled in the way that professional organizations control their responses when the situation demands it and the instinct to say something louder is being actively managed. Dave Roberts, when asked about the impoundment in the context of a post-game environment that had been dramatically reshaped by what had happened, chose his words with the visible care of someone who understood that every syllable was going to be examined. He said that the organization had full confidence in Shohei Ohtani. He said that they were cooperating fully with the league's process. He said that they expected the investigation to reach conclusions that reflected the reality of what Ohtani is and what he has always been. He did not say that the investigation was without basis. He did not say that the league had made an error. He did not use any of the language of indignation that organizations sometimes reach for when they believe their players are being treated unfairly. What he said was careful. Measured. The language of a manager who has been around long enough to know that investigations resolve themselves and that the way an organization behaves during the process is remembered long after the result is announced. But in the space between what he said and what he didn't say, the questions kept living. The reaction across baseball was not uniform. Among players, there was a range of responses that reflected the complexity of the situation rather than the clean narrative that media coverage tends to prefer. Some expressed immediate and unambiguous support for Ohtani, the kind of support that comes from watching a player perform at his level for long enough that the idea of artificial enhancement feels not just unlikely but almost insulting to the scale of what he has demonstrated through legitimate means. Others said less. Not because they believed something irregular had occurred, but because the investigation exists for a reason, and because the history of the sport has taught even the most charitable observers that the investigation reaching its conclusion is the only moment at which certainty is actually available. That restraint, that willingness to wait for the process rather than rushing to a verdict in either direction, was itself a kind of statement about how seriously the sport was taking what had been set in motion. Shohei Ohtani said nothing publicly. That is consistent with who he is and how he has always operated in moments of external pressure. He is not a player who reaches for the microphone when the microphone would serve his own interests at the expense of the process. He is not a player who performs innocence in the particular theatrical way that sometimes substitutes for actual innocence in public life. He said nothing. Which meant that the images carried everything. The home run itself, playing on a loop across every platform that covers the sport. The bat leaving the dugout in the hands of the umpire. The crowd that had been celebrating 30 seconds earlier suddenly confused about what it was witnessing. The 40,000 people who came to see baseball and found themselves inside something that felt considerably larger than a game. And underneath all of it, the question that the investigation was now officially responsible for answering. MLB has not announced a timeline for the investigation's conclusion. That absence of a timeline is itself information. It means the process is complex enough that committing to a deadline would be premature. It means the analysis required is thorough enough that accelerating it further, beyond the urgency already applied, would risk the integrity of the result. It means that the sport has decided that getting this right matters more than getting it fast, even though getting it fast is what everyone involved wants more than almost anything. Because the alternative, a prolonged investigation, an extended period of uncertainty, a season's worth of home runs sitting in the unresolved space between achievement and question mark, is a story that damages something larger than one player's reputation. It is a story that sits inside the sport and refuses to leave until the answer arrives. The bat is in a laboratory somewhere. The investigation is urgent and ongoing. Shohei Ohtani has hit 22 home runs. And baseball, which has seen enough of its own history to know that these moments always resolve eventually, always produce an answer that either restores what was believed or permanently alters it, is waiting. The crowd that rose when the ball left the bat has gone home. The celebration has been suspended in a particular kind of institutional amber, preserved exactly as it was at the moment the umpires moved, waiting to find out whether it gets to finish. Some stories end with the final out. This one was just beginning.